Hi everyone, this is Laura from Grain & Company, and today I'm here with one of February's Creative Maker subscription box projects. This is the Lucky Gnome that you found in your box, and so I'm going to get started with how I've done that. So first of all, you want to make sure all of your pieces are here. You want to make sure you have all your supplies, foam wedges, some paper towel, have some brushes of a couple sizes here because we might paint with the brush, or we might use some of the sponges, or we might even use the baby wipes, but it's nice to have them all in your area. And you're going to need some gloves to be able to do some staining. So first of all, I'm going to stain my base and then get that out of the way, and then I'll break apart my gnome and get that started painting. So grab your gloves. All right, so you have your gloves and your pieces. Now, unfortunately, I am at home and I thought I had some foam brushes here, so you're going to see me stain a little differently. It is easier to use the foam brush, but I'm going to use baby wipes. So certainly try this if you like. So I'm just going to dip it in the stain, and then I'm just going to wipe it on. And I only need to do one of the layers, so I don't have to do inside and out. So on the top one, whoops. On the top one, I'm just doing the top layer. However, the bottom one, I'm going to do both sides because you'll still see some from the top, and I always like to have my underside finished if I can. So I'm just wiping this on. I'm going to do both sides at once. Oops, there we go. Okay, and then I'm going to give it a wipe. So you did the same thing with your foam brush, and you'll be fine there. So as you're handling it and your gloves get full of stain, just watch as you handle this that you don't leave those stain imprints on your surface. And then, yeah, just let those set off to dry, and then we will move on to the next little bit here. Now I'm doing this project two separate times. Like, I'm doing this project and then I did the shamrock. When I did my sample, you'll find it's actually easier to do the shamrock and the gnome at the same time, because you've got some downtime while you're waiting for each layer of your shamrock to dry, which doesn't take very long. But in the meantime, you can take that corresponding color and do it in your on your gnome, so that way you've got the paint out once, and you can move fairly quickly that way. But for today, I'm just doing each project separately, just to show you it from start to finish. But for yourselves, you guys can do them together, and that might move it faster for you. Okay, so next we're going to take our pieces here. Now this is your back and these are your front pieces. So what I like to do is break these apart into the colors that I'm going to paint them. That way it's easier to make sure I get them all when I need it done. So this is a brown, which is going to go for the bottom here in a brown. So I'm going to leave that there. My beard is white, as well as one of my shamrocks here. So I'm going to actually take this apart. These hands are in the nude color, so I'm going to put them with the nose. And I'm going to take out my white shamrock, and I might leave this one in. So I'm just going to flip it over and put a piece of tape on. Now usually the tape I put in the front doesn't stick so well on the back, but this time it might be okay. And then the Lucky I'm just going to leave for now, because I will paint it in its template, because it will be easier. But I just don't want to get that green onto that one. So there we go, everything is broken apart. So what I'm going to do is start with the chocolate, because I need to paint this, but once that's dry I need to come in here and paint some of the body, because when the beard is applied, then you can see this part will need to be green. So we'll just come in there and do that here shortly. Okay, so let's start with the brown. So there's a few different ways you can, or a couple different ways you could at least do this. You can paint this with the baby wipe because it's so big. You can paint it with a brush, but you just want to be careful not to get paint in those areas there. Or you can use your makeup sponges. I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to actually use the baby wipe. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to fold it so I've got a double layer. And then I'm going to, so I'm not going to start right at the edge. I'm going to kind of start in the middle so I can take that little bit of paint. And I'm just going to wipe it on. And so when you're doing this, you'll notice you have a bit more control. You're using your finger and just gently wipe it on. It'll be a bit more translucent than if you were using a brush and you're painting your first coat. But as you do more coats, then you will build up that color. And it's less messy. You're not worrying about getting a whole bunch of paint on the edge like a paintbrush would do. So you might prefer this to the brush, but you've got your options. And so we're just going to let that dry, and that's actually going to not take a whole lot of time to dry because we're just applying a very thin layer. Okay, so that part's done. Now this side you've got two options. If you feel you can do it with your baby wipe, then you can come in, but you only want to paint to this line. So you can either just come in here and just wipe it on. You want to be careful on how much you put down here at the bottom because that's the part that's going to go in the stand, and you don't want to cake that up with a whole lot of paint because then it might not fit properly. I mean, you can always sand it to get a better fit, but there you go. All right. Now the thing you want to do is make sure that you've painted down far enough on there. So just grab your beard here and check it. So yeah, I'm going to go up just a little bit more. And there we go. And then the other side will be green when we come back at it. Okay, so that's the brown, and that's almost dry. So I'm just going to go ahead and do another color while that's waiting. And yeah, okay, so let's go ahead and let's do the white because it's another big area that we might have to do again. Now I'm going to do a baby wipe again, but I'm not going to use the same one just so I don't transfer any brown. So I'm going to use the white, and I'm going to grab my white paint. Now the baby wipes are really good for when you're trying to paint over a surface that we have engraved, because the idea is to not paint in that area. That way you've got the definition that we have engraved in there for you. Okay, so once again, you're going to dip it into the white. Now you want to be careful, and you want to make sure that you hardly have any paint on your baby wipe, especially when you approach this area here. So I can get some on my finger, and I can start over here where I have a bit more openness. And remember, try and complete those, so you can wipe it on, but just like you do with the paintbrush, take that baby wipe and go right across so it eliminates any strokes. When you do your first coat with a baby wipe, you'll tend to notice that depending on which direction you're painting, it will snag the wood a little bit more. So now, as you approach this, just gently wipe over top. You don't want to put any pressure and squish any paint into that area. And then if you do get any paint on the side after, you can go back and wipe that. And that's what's nice about the baby wipes, because it really helps with keeping your edges clean on top of painting any of your surfaces. So that way you don't have to be quite as careful, especially around these curvy edges. I'm just going to kind of do it messy right now so you can see. So I'm just going to flip this over, and even if I was trying to be messy, you can see a little bit coming over the edge. Not a whole lot, but you can go back in there and wipe it. And you don't want to leave it too long when you're wiping because it does dry, and it does make it a little bit harder to do. All right, so that's a nice thin coat. With the whites, you'll notice you probably will want to do 3, but that's okay. Okay, so that's the white one, and we'll try and use that one up as well. And as we're doing white, I'm going to come back in and I'm going to do my little shamrock. So the easiest way to do that, unless you want to do it, so you can do it 2 ways. You can put it on a piece of tape and paint it that way, or you can pop this shamrock out and tape this one inside, and you can paint it that way, pop it out after, and do the other one. But for now, I'm going to do it here. Now the only thing is that it's not going to stick very well to my surface, so I might just have to fold this back here, guys. I just have a piece of parchment paper, just so if anything was to drip, it doesn't stick on there. Okay, I'm not sure if you can see that camera angle. Yeah, you should be able to. Okay, so take a little makeup wedge, and I have some all sorts of sizes because once I'm done, I will trim them off and keep them for something small like this. And dip it in your paint, blot it off, and gently paint that. Now you don't want too much. Now with this, because you're not doing it in the template, you'll get what I call a little ghosting a bit on the edges, which, you know, to me is fine as long as it's even all the way around. If you don't like that, then you can come back and take your baby wipe, and then you can just wipe that off. Sometimes it's a little harder with all those little nooks and crannies, but for the most part, you should be able to just wipe that surface and it will be clean. Now when you wipe these edges, because they are laser cut, sometimes it will just discolor a little bit, but don't worry, you're going to sand as well, and that will come off, and you'll do another color or another coat, so that will cover it up as well. Okay, so let that sit, and since I've got the brown out right now, I'm going to finish with these 2. Okay, so next I want to sand this because it is very rough, and my baby wipe will snag a lot. So with the grain, go in there and sand, and then just give it a wipe. And then do the same thing with this one. And then we're going to repeat that. So grab your chocolate and do the same thing. Grab your baby wipe, start a new area if you want, and repeat. You can already see with that second coat that it's a lot more solid. So you will just do as many coats until you like what you see. Now I didn't wipe any of the edges on these because if I did happen to take some chocolate over the edge, you're not going to see it. So I'm not worried about the dark. There we go. So I'm going to let that one dry and come back in with this one. Same thing. Just kind of get your nail underneath the baby wipe so it creates a an edge for you, and then you should just be able to run it along that score line there. There we go. Just like that. All right, so for me, for sure for the bottom, I'm only gonna do 2. The hat, I might do 1 more, but for now, we're just gonna let that dry. And I'm going to come back to the white. So see how fast this goes, and if you're doing it with another project, you can just kind of cycle all of those colors around. All right, so once again, we're going to sand. And don't be afraid to sand, because it's definitely what's going to make that surface nice and smooth. The first coat, I'm not worried if I've taken a little bit of the paint back. I still have another coat or 2 to do. But now it'll be easier for that baby wipe or paintbrush, depending on what you've done on whatever area. It'll be easier to paint now. Okay, so now we're going to go back with the white. Now, depending on how fast you are, if you finding your baby wipes are drying out just by leaving them out, just grab a plastic bag or something to put them in. If you let them sit out too long, they will dry faster on you. Okay, same thing. Wipe this on. Now you'll notice going back and forth will be a whole lot easier. And just gently go over that area, and you can see, like, I really don't have a whole lot of paint on my baby wipe. All right, yeah, I'm just gonna come down here. And then I'm gonna check my edges. See, if you don't have much in your baby wipe, you pretty much will be good for not getting your edges at all. So that's what's nice about that as well. And then I'm going to come back to my shamrock that I stuck somewhere. Oh, there it is. And I will do that one. All right, I'm going to show you the second coat in this, just because it's also easier for me to paint since it doesn't want to stick that well to my surface here. So actually that tape won't stick at all. Okay, so put it across the back there like that. Grab your sponge, dip it in the paint, blot it off so it's almost dry, and then on the surface. Now, another reason why I like to actually paint in its template more than I do on the tape like I showed you is that it kind of helps cover those edges. So as long as you don't load this with too much paint, your edges should stay fairly clean. So anyways, I'm just going to give that a moment, and I might do one more coat on that white one as well. Okay, let's come back to the brown. Let me see, my hands are all dirty here. See if I like it. I think I'm going to give it one more coat. Now, brown is a dark color, but it's also a clear base, so sometimes it can take multiple coats to get a nice solid chocolate. And because we're putting on very, very thin coats, then that's why it's taking me 3 coats rather than maybe 2 on a different color. All right, so I'm only going to do the hat. I'm fine with the base. It's not an area that's going to be seen a whole lot. So I'll come back in with my chocolate and do my 3rd coat. Okay, there we go. And once again, just because it's still paint and doesn't matter how you apply it, you just don't want to keep playing with it as it starts to dry, because that's when it gets streaky, draggy, it leaves marks on your surface. So that way, yeah, if you miss something, or you notice a little mark after, just leave it until it dries, and then you can come back and sand it out, do another coat. All right, so that's gonna dry there. So that one is done. And we're done with the chocolate. The white should be able to do its last coat. Yeah. All right, now let's grab my baby wipe. And one more time. Okay, and that should be good. Yeah, that's good enough for me. Check your edges and you'll be fine. And remember, we're gonna put something, we're putting the word lucky across. There's some hands in there, so it does cover up a little bit of that as well. Okay. Just wipe any extra paint off your hands. Okay. Oh, I forgot. I have one little one here, and I might do it once more. So when you're painting something in the template, and first of all, you don't want to use a whole lot of paint. Second of all, in like just a few moments after you paint, depending on how big your area is and such, is that you want to make sure that it's not stuck in there. So just even move it, and it can sit in there and dry, but as long as you just make sure that it doesn't stick in there because you've got a thing of paint down the edge, then it's fine. There we go. So I'm just going to put it back in there, and I'm just going to carefully sand over top. And based on that, I'm okay with that. So I'm just going to pop it out, and I'm going to leave it right there. And then I will put my green one back in. And we'll leave it there off to the side. Okay, so the next color, I'm going to check on this. This is dry, and so I'm going to give it a sand. Okay, so now we're going to work on the next part of the body, and that's with our lighter color here called Sage. Now, once again, you have a couple options for painting that area, because you're not painting the whole thing. But you don't want to just paint up to it. You want to paint a little bit past, so that way when you lay this on top, you know you've got enough coverage. So, so just kind of make a mental note, you know, maybe to go in about a third of the way on each side, and you'll know you'll have enough coverage for what you're doing there. So yeah, if you feel like you want to, you can definitely tape over this. You could always take some tape. At least down here where it's straight, if you want, you can always put a row of tape all the way across and just make sure you seal that part off. There is no score line there, so you may find that to be a little bit easier. Here you've got that little groove that you can paint up to. Either way, it's whatever works best for you. I usually don't tape it, but I thought I would show you. Okay, so grab your paint. Now you can, like I said, you could use the baby wipes, or you could use a brush. I'll demonstrate with the brush this time so you can see. So these are the small ones that we have in that brush pack. And we've also got the pointy ones. So whichever one you feel will work best for you. You might like the pointy one to get started. Now watch, when these first ones are not used, you just want to kind of work them a little bit here. Maybe dip them in some water. I don't have any water by me right now, so I'm just going to work it. Yeah, I think this one will be too big for me. So I'm going to go in with the little one and just give it a little bit of paint. Now don't start right where it meets. Kind of back off a little bit and blend that paint a little bit, and then just slowly work your way to that line. Now your first coat might not look quite so good. The wood's a little rough, and so once we sand that first coat back, it will, that second coat will go on a lot nicer. And if you look at the wood grain, we're actually working against it. So sometimes the paintbrush doesn't want to maneuver as nicely against the grain as it does with. So I don't need a whole lot at the bottom here, but I am going to come across. So just be careful when you go over the tape. Make sure you've sealed it really, really well, because you don't want the paint to bleed underneath it. And if it does, you can always go back and touch it up with some brown. So right now I'm just doing the outline, and then I'm going to come back and fill in what I want. Just make sure you even out that paint so you don't have a huge blob of paint sitting there. All right, so we're coming up to about here when we paint. So I might actually take my bigger brush because it goes faster and come in here and paint. And I'm going to go off the edge. And I mean, if you get a little paint there, don't worry, you can always take your baby wipe and wipe it off. All right, so there's that part, and then I'm going to come around to the other side. I mean, if you want to paint right across, you absolutely can. It's not necessary, you won't see it, but you definitely can. Just make sure you come down here far enough, and then just watch your edges. Like I said, this first coat's going to look a little rough, and if you need to, you can always take your beard and check it over top. Make sure you at least got what you need covered. I'm good with that, so I'm just going to let that dry, and then I'm going to grab another color. So I always find it handy to have a Ziploc bag there so I can put my brushes in there so they don't dry out. All right, so the next color we can do is, I'm going to do my hands here. All right, so this is where you're going to put it on some tape, and because tape does not stick to parchment paper, I'm going to roll this back and line these up here. Just stick it to your surface. So I mean, if you've got you know, a tablecloth, you may have to find something else to tape your pieces to. All right, so you'll have your skin tone color. Now I'm done with my white, and I don't need a whole lot of this, so I'm going to cut off the part that I didn't use anymore. And now I'm going to use it for my next color. So take some paint. Now that is definitely way too much, but blot it off. And then gently, I'd have to hold a corner. Do that. Now if you wanted to, you could put those hands back in that little template and do it that way, but I had to do the nose, so I figured I would just leave it. All right, so those are drying, and let's take a feel at this. And that is dry for me as well. So I'm going to give it a sand, and then I'm going to go back and repeat that again. I'm just watching where I sand. I don't necessarily need to sand the brown again, and I'm trying to avoid that just in case there is just a little bit of wetness left, but so make sure it's all nice and smooth. Take your fingers and feel that. And then just wipe that clean. And now it looks way better, even sanded already. And we're going to go back and do a second coat. And I'm just going to put my makeup sponge away, leave those there, and grab my brushes and my color. Okay, so once again, I'm just going to leave these here. I'm going to kind of just cover them up. And I'm going to come in here and do my second coat. Now you notice that paintbrush will just glide a whole lot nicer now that you're not fighting with that wood. Okay, and then I'm going to come back in with this one. And as you see, I'm working over the edge that way, because if you go like this, there's a chance that you can run that brush and then it will leave some paint. Where if I brush off and over the edge, then I'm less likely to bring a lip of paint on the edge. There we go. And you know what? Let's just finish the center. There we go. All right, so we're gonna let that dry, and that will cover that part there. And if you want, you can go ahead and pull off your tape. So see, as long as you seal that with your finger really, really well, you should get a nice clean edge there. Okay, now let's finish with the skin tone. See how fast each piece moves when you don't have to use a whole lot of paint. All right, stick that back on, and there. Bring this over. Okay. Whoops. And I mean, you can always hold it. You're just going to get a little bit more paint on your fingers. And I did get a little bit on the edge here, so I'm just going to wipe it off. Okay. See, nice and clean there. that one's done, and I'm just going to give this one a quick wipe. Okay, so those ones are done as well. Okay, so we have 2 colors left. So let's put those over here so they aren't in the way. Okay, so now let's put some tape on the back. And now we can peel off this. Now, if you're very careful, you can do both colors at once. Okay, so I'm going to grab another sponge because this one's just getting a little bit too small, and I'm going to grab my next color. So this is for the little tiny shamrock. Actually, you know what? If that's all I've got, might get one more little bit out of this one. Okay, so teeny tiny sponge and blot and dab. Okay, so that one's there. And then we'll grab the dark green. And come and do the lucky. And so just be careful as you approach that other piece. Okay, so that won't take very long to dry, so I'm just gonna put it there. In the meantime, I'm just going to come in here and do my final sand on my hat. Now, when you're sanding, if you want to distress the edges a little bit, go ahead and do that. That one's done. And this is dry, so we can do this. That clean, and we can come and do the hands and the nose. Just be very careful. You don't have to press that hard because you don't want to wear any of that paint much away. And we can do the shamrock. All right, so these are already dry, so I'm going to come in here and sand these. Once again, you always want to check, make sure you can move that layer in and out of your template so you know the paint hasn't made it stick in there. If your layers are nice and thin, you shouldn't have to worry about sticking, but you want to make sure you're not using a whole lot of paint. All right, so let's try the little shamrock here again. Okay, so that should be good for its last coat. And now to do the lucky. middle pieces aren't important. You don't have, if one of yours doesn't have it in there, it's not a big deal. Okay, so now I'm just gonna let that dry because that is good enough coverage for me. And then we can start to assemble. One more thing to sand is your stands, and so that's why I do them first, because they usually take a little longer to dry than the paint. So let's go ahead and sand. Now it's really hard on this particular shape to sand with the grain, so you know it's not the end of the world if you do it on something like this. Now you'll notice mine's got a little dud here. That's just a cutting error, so don't worry, yours guys are in better shape than mine. Okay, I'll give these a wipe. Okay, so eventually we're going to be gluing these together, but we want to make sure that your gnome will fit properly in here. You haven't put too much paint at the bottom and it makes it really tough to fit in there. So mine will fit in there just nice. Once you give it a little bit of a push and you can get it a little bit through to that next layer, then you should be able to line up that other one. Okay, so first of all, of course I don't want this together yet. So first of all, make sure it fits to the first one. If it fits to the first one, you can always just come back in with the second one and make sure it fits through that. They're cut exactly the same, but you can just double check it. So once that fits, you can leave that. If it doesn't fit, take your sandpaper and gently sand. I would sand more on the back so you're not wearing away your paint. And if it's a little bit snug this way on the sides, which it shouldn't be, then you can sand here to wear that away. But for the most part, it should fit just fine. So now we're going to continue putting this together. So your hat will go here. So we'll just, excuse me, you'll peel off the adhesive that we've cut with the back of your shapes. So just grab that and start to peel. Now, if it wants to lift, sometimes it does, then just come back and give it a rub and then start to peel. You'll find sometimes it's easier to peel in the direction of the grain, but just take your time. Just because it's an odd shape here, it just wants to get caught up, but usually it comes off fairly easily. It is very sticky. So if you do get your finger on it, and it may pull some up. So just grab it by the edge and then take your base and line it up. Now don't press it in right away, just kind of gently lay it on top and move it around, because as soon as you make full contact, it's very hard to remove. So just gently line it up. And once you're good, you can start to give it a press into place. There you go. All right, so all your edges are lined up there. Okay, and next is our beard, which, oops, I forgot to do that last sanding, so let me just do that. Okay, so same thing with this. You will peel it, turn it over, and peel off that back. See how it wants to lift there, so just rub it back. And you can always give it a rub first just to ensure that it's already made full contact. Okay, so we're gonna do the same thing. Line up those edges. Now, sometimes I won't make full contact yet because the nose goes in there, and I want you to make sure that you've lined everything up properly so that way the nose fits in there. Because if you make it a little crooked, then it might not fit. So just get that nose ready, place it in there, and then that way you can give this a press as well. All right. Okay, so that part's done. Now, during that time, this is dried, so now you can do a light sanding. Now, for some reason, you can't put it together the same day you've painted it. And I did get you to make sure that you check that these don't stick in there after a few minutes. But depending on the size of your project, sometimes they're not as simple as this, is that if you cannot do this right away, it's best to take the tape off and let all of your pieces just sit on its surface to dry that way. Because then the next day, if you need your template, if it needs one, then you can use it to center your pieces. But it's better if you leave them open like this, so that way you know they're not going to get stuck in its template when it's time to come out. Because I can guarantee you if they're stuck in there, it's not coming out without getting broken. So, all right, so next bit, we can do either way. So you can do the shamrock up here, which is just placed wherever you want it there. And then the lucky will get placed with wherever you want your words. And then you're just going to stick your hands wherever you want them. So depending on which way you want your hands, you can put them that way, or you can do them this way. But same thing. So when you're peeling the words off, they are always a little bit more delicate. So I'm going to show you. Okay, so you can do it this way, or especially if they're even thinner than this, you can see if I can get it back in here. Okay, I'm just going to line this up. Okay, so I'm going to put this back in here, and I'm going to use my template to just kind of hold the shape in place. So that way you can, instead of it being flimsy in your hand, you can just gently pull on that tape with the support of the template holding it down. So that's another way to help remove those fragile pieces, or the adhesive from the fragile pieces. There we go. Might take you a little longer, but then you know that your word's going to be in good condition. And then you just lift that off and it will come out. Okay, so now let's just place this wherever we want it. Okay, that looks good to me. So I'm just gonna press that down and put one hand here. And one there. And then we can come back up here and do this. Okay, so kind of remember where you wanted it. So I haven't pushed on that green piece yet, so I knew that I could still move it around. Okay, and there's that one. All right, and then that's done. Okay, so now we're gonna take the stand, and this is where you're gonna need some wood glue. Okay, so what I'd like to do is get this in first. Now you want to make sure that it is straight in. Okay, so mine has gone through and I've worked it through, and I can see now that the lip of the back has gone through, so that's easier for me to find. Find my good side. It doesn't matter. And then I'll know that it'll line up in there once they're layered. So once I've got this one through, then I will add the glue. Now be careful with the glue, because unless you want this gnome to permanently stay in there, as long as you avoid the glue touching the gnome itself, you should be able to remove it from its stand when you're done, and pack it away that way. However, if you accidentally get too much glue on there, then you might just have to wrap it up with it all together. So it doesn't need a whole lot. Grab your base. Line it up. It's easier to do when it's on the table. There we go. And then push that into place. There we go. Let's not down yet. Okay, there it is. So now you are able to, let's see, wants to pop out. There we go. It's because this side's crooked. There we go. All right, now he's in and he's done. There you go. I hope you guys enjoyed that. And yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you next month for the next project. Thanks, guys.